Welcome to Season 2 of Why Should I Trust You? On today's episode, amid breaking news about massive changes to the childhood vaccine schedule, changes to the dietary guidelines, a big investment in rural healthcare, we bring together a group of doctors and a group of MAHA supporters to ask, what is it like to be a doctor in America today? How are things going from their perspective? And how about being a patient in their office? What's that experience like? We're focusing on what it's like to be a doctor today because we found through our conversations that one of the Rosetta Stones for understanding what initially draws many to MAHA is a negative interaction with, yes, a doctor. That proverbial 15-minute appointment where someone's health struggle collides with a system that can sometimes feel rushed, protocol-driven, and uninterested in them. We hear the same story again and again. A patient feeling dismissed, unheard, or brushed off. They then seek answers somewhere else. So what about the doctors? Are they frustrated with the system too? If empowered, what would they change? Are they feeling listened to by parents when all they're trying to do is help their lives? And how will those changes breaking just this week impact the critical work they do as the trusted source on health for a patient and their family? In short, how do the people who train their entire lives to care for others experience this moment of major upheaval? Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah, we're back.
Season 2. Can you believe it?
Happy New Year. A lot of stuff.
I know.
Season 2. We weren't canceled.
Listen, we did 65 episodes in season 1.
I don't think we're season 2. 65 episodes.
Maybe we're like season 4 is what you're saying?
Yeah. Like
Mark has a calculation. He told me this.
Yeah.
What do you think we're at?
Like 11. Like, Dancing with the Stars is on like season 45 and they haven't been on for 45 years.
Okay. Okay, Mark, that is such a great point. So maybe we're in season 3, 4. I don't know. But Look, here's the thing. In season 2, we're going to keep bringing you these great conversations. You're about to hear another one today. But I know for me, guys, my goal is to continue talking with people out there living their lives, real people doing the real work, and talk to people who may have some unorthodox viewpoints and to get to those fundamental pressure points in our conversations around health. And hopefully we even get to travel a little bit more, meet people where they are. I think our whole goal is just to help folks understand each other a bit better so we can actually start to move towards some semblance of a cooperation together.
I've been thinking about it a lot too. And I think that like season 1, we did a great job of like listening and having like a lot of open conversations. But I think for me, season 2 is that listening is the beginning. Science and public health and, medicine, they're all under like real pressure. And I think for us and for me, I think I want to like focus on, impact and how do we like use these like sometimes like what you just said, unorthodox, perspectives to get down to the pressure points that need to be addressed. So hopefully we'll be able to do more of that.
Mark, we're going to hit the road. I think that's really what you're saying. We're going to do road trips. We're going to get our playlists. But look, first, who are we? I'm Brenda Adhikari.
Yeah, I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
And I'm Dr. Mark.
Yeah, and this is the second season of Why Should I Trust You, a podcast all about the breakdown of trust in medicine and science and public health. You guys can send us questions, comments to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. We read every single one. If you got a story idea, send it. We're also a Substack, so just Google Why Should I Trust You and Substack, and it will pop up. There's a lot of content there. You can sign up for a subscription, which is a weekly outlook, I guess you can call it, on things that we're seeing or things that we're hearing that are coming to this space. And these days, that's a lot of stuff. And if you're new to us, Brenda and I are journalists. Maggie's a virologist with Johns Hopkins. Mark's a medical reporter and a physician. And today, given our topic, that means he's going to be more interviewee rather than interviewer. So that's kind of a cool twist.
Yeah, absolutely. So guys, in a moment, we're going to dig into the conversation with the doctors. Really excited, just trying to really get into what it's like to be a doctor in America today. But before we do, there was some pretty big news this week. We're talking, of course, about Secretary Kennedy's HHS changing the vaccine schedule by reducing the number of routine childhood vaccine recommendations on the CDC website. It is big news. There's a lot to unpack. We want you to know that we are going to touch on that today. We have so many practicing physicians, including, pediatricians and family doctors. So they actually interface with this issue day to day. So they're going to be talking about that. But do know that we have a special episode planned. We're going to be recording it later this week. We're going to drop it whenever we get around to actually getting it done, but maybe this weekend or early next week. Stay tuned for that. So on to today's episode. In a moment, we're going to be joined by 3 of our friends from MAHA. They've been on the show before, as well as these 4 doctors who graciously accepted this invitation to have this conversation together. And I do want to say we selected a group of what's often referred to as allopathic doctors, which I checked Google for a definition. And it said that an allopathic physician is a medical MD doctor who practices modern conventional medicine using evidence-based methods like drugs, surgery, and therapies to diagnose, treat, and prevent illness and injury. And the reason I make that sort of statement about allopathic medicine is that we know many listeners of our show also see alternative medicine doctors, healers, functional medicine specialists, and we would like to explore those topics this season as well. But today we wanted to talk to the group of doctors who the majority of Americans see, that most of us see, the most sort of common experience in this country. So, Tom, help us set the stage with some of the broader trend lines for, I guess we'll call it the modern patient-facing medicine today.
All right, who on this call has ever heard of RVUs? Brenda?
Is that a kind of SUV?
It's a new show on no. I've never heard of it. Maggie, have you heard of this? No. Mark, I got a feeling you've heard of this.
I mean, it's like 101, doctoring 101. Yeah,
exactly.
It's like basic.
Right. So right out of
I'm not going to tell you what it is, though.
Us patients and doctors are living in different planets. So what is an RVU? Why does it matter? It speaks to sort of the economic forces that doctors today operate in. They probably always have operated in, but it's pretty pronounced these days, and we'll get into that. An RVU it stands for relative value unit. In short, it's a kind of formula that Medicare and then by extension, many private insurers use to decide how much a doctor or a practice gets paid for nearly everything that happens to you during your healthcare visit. So that's the time with the doctor, a procedure, a surgery. All of those things are assigned a certain number of RVUs, which determines how much the physician gets paid by Medicaid, Medicare, insurance. And over time, many have argued that this system, these RVUs, has come to not just shape how doctors are compensated, but the actual visit itself. Like how long it is, how many patients a doctor will visit within a day, what kinds of care are prioritized, whether there's lots of room for listening, not much room for listening. It's shaping our medical experiences. This came about in the 1990s, was originally designed to, rein in spiraling healthcare costs. And today, I think a lot of people will refer to this as sort of the 15-minute visit you get with your doctor, which isn't like a hard and fast number. It's more of a phrase, a shorthand that speaks to how money and economic forces can warp the doctor-patient relationship in this system that has lots of financial pressures on physicians to pack patients into the office, all at the expense of time, expensive nuance. And I think what we're seeing as we talk to more and more people from MAHA, it is impacting people's trust. There is another financial pressure that's entering the picture too, and curbing sort of the doctor practice today, and that's private equity. It's a reality. Private equity is buying up doctors' practices. In fact, a recent study found that a single private equity firm now owns more than half of all specialists in certain U.S. markets. One firm owning more than half of the practices of these specialists in certain U.S. markets. And how is that working out for patients? A study in JAMA from a year ago surveyed patients at over 70 hospitals that had been taken over by private equity firms and found that patients there had lower satisfaction with their care than the patients of non-private equity hospitals.
Yeah, Tom, private equity taking over is just a relatively new phenomenon. And what is private equity even? It's basically the business, Wall Street, taking over managing medical practices. So these business firms, they come in, they get controlling stake in the practice. So they'll look at a practice and say, oh, this practice is worth, $1 million. I'm going to buy that. And now I'm going to run that and I'm going to increase that practice's efficiency. I'm going to take all the what we call best practices from the business world and start running this doctor's office like a business. The goal on their side is very different and sometimes in conflict with like what the physicians are, right? So the physician's priority is like taking care of patients. Now all of a sudden you have Wall Street running it, and profitability is important and growing the company is important. And the biggest thing about private equity is that they want to turn this over. They want to take this as a commodity and they want to sell it for more money than they bought it. So they increase so-called efficiency, talk about operations, streamline processes, cut costs, really looking at resources in a way that that Wall Street does as opposed to physicians do. So Tom, you talked about satisfaction, sometimes going down if private equity takes over. Cost actually goes up in a weird way because the data suggests that if private equity takes over, prices increase in the range of about 4 to 16% in many specialties. So, and even larger increases in markets where they're the dominant force. So this conversation that we had with all these doctors and, MAHA folk, we wanted to focus on something a little bit different. Obviously, in that system where the business of medicine is a real factor, but we also wanted to just talk about what it's all about, that doctor-patient experience. And so when people talk about pressures on doctors, we really go right away to, oh, doctors are burned out. And that is a real phenomenon for sure. But the deeper issue is that our system and the way that we work has shifted, sometimes by accident, shifted doctors away from the parts of their job that give us like meaning and satisfaction. So now if you look at our day, like a huge amount of my day and a doctor's day is now spent on things that are like administrative, documenting, clicking, entering information in the medical record. I mean, sometimes I feel like I spend more time clicking and documenting than actually like seeing the patient and practicing medicine. And, there's a real mismatch between what doctors are expected to do and the time that we're given to do it. Right now, we have this era where you have your smartphone and you have an app and you have My Chart and My Health and you can email your doctors. And those messages are constant. It's like a hamster on a wheel, I call it. And the work doesn't stop, when the clinic ends or when, all the patients are gone. That's when doctors really like ramp up their administrative work. We take it home. We take our laptops home. We do charting and documenting and following up on labs. All that is like at night after, people have kids, you put your kids to bed, on weekends. Sometimes I spend the weekend just trying to catch up. And then there's this idea of autonomy, really. And, do physicians have that in the system that we're practicing? Or is it a lack of autonomy? Physicians are still, we're like where the buck stops and ultimately the ones responsible for outcomes. And, we can and we are sued for issues that happen in the exam room. But, right now that's happening when physicians have less control over how care is delivered. And that really sets up a conflict. So how do we're held accountable, but we're not maybe able to decide what tests are being ordered, or, maybe the insurer is going to deny something that we want to do, but we're still responsible. And so that gap between like the responsibility and control puts doctors in situations where they know, and we know what good care looks like, but we can't always give it. Doctors are not all that happy about the situation that we find ourselves in. There was a big survey of doctors recently that gave out some pretty disturbing results. And this is a number that we should all listen to carefully because it's about the future of medicine. Only 12% of physicians said they'd recommend this profession to the younger generation. Only 12%. And when you asked if over the past 5 years, their enjoyment of being a doctor, a lot of them said it had gone down. 77% said it had gone down.
Yeah, it was really interesting to piece through that survey and look at the most challenging aspects that are facing doctors today from the doctor's perspective. And obviously, rising medical costs were right up there. But interesting, doctors also cited misinformation from social media that's coming into that, into that clinic that they're dealing with, and sort of being on the other side of that breakdown of trust in the eyes of their patients. They're kind of being seen differently, and they can feel it in the rooms. One internal medicine physician said in that survey, healthcare is broken because of bloated administration and treating this like a supply-demand business. And another said, patients are openly distrustful, aggressive, and disrespectful. And, that's a lot of what we've been hearing, and we're hearing it right here on the podcast. A lot of this comes back to our core, thesis, which is the breakdown of trust. Patients are frustrated. Doctors are frustrated. It's creating a real generator for mistrust in this country.
And we talked about how, in actuality, doctors continue to be one of the most trusted sources of health information. A 2025 KFF survey found 85% of Americans trust their own doctor a great deal or a fair amount. This is to make the right health recommendations, but it's important to note that that number stood at 93% just 2 years earlier, so it's trending down. And when you add to that picture this Mitre-Harris poll survey on patient experience, it found that 52% of Americans feel their symptoms are ignored, dismissed, or not believed when they're seeking medical treatment. A big survey by Edelman found that half of young people believe that individuals who do their own research can know as much as a doctor. Nearly 4 in 10 say they followed advice seen on social media instead of their medical providers.
Yeah, so we discussed a lot of this on this conversation. It was a terrific conversation. Just to tell you a little bit about how the conversation went, we had 3 MAHA supporters and 4 doctors. The 3 MAHA supporters were Len Arcuri from North Carolina, Nancy Fuller from Cincinnati, Ohio, Danny DeLuca from Athens, Ohio. And then we had Dr. Craig Spencer, who practices in Providence, Rhode Island, Dr. Keisha Callens in Georgia, Dr. Jamie Lair in upstate New York, and Dr. Ross England in Philadelphia. And so, again, we just ask that it can be tough sometimes, but to keep following that bouncing ball. We do make an effort to make sure that we introduce everybody before they talk. It was a great conversation, and it's coming right up. In the beginning, what we do is we just ask you tell us a little bit about yourself and also why you think you're here today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Mark Abdulmalik. I, as you may know, am a co-host of this wonderful podcast called Why Should I Trust You? I also come to the table as a practicing doctor. I see patients 5 days a week. I love my job. I specialize in skin cancer, so it's a very niche area of medicine. I get to spend a lot of time with my patients, which is a luxury that not a lot of doctors have, and we really get to know each other. And I think that is unique. I also spend a lot of time reading the news. I'm a, avid news junkie. I've worked in network news for about, 12, 13, 14, 15 years now. I work at ABC News. I'm a medical reporter there, medical contributor. I've spent a lot of time there doing investigative reporting. I kind of joke that the reason why I got into all this is because I was a reporter trapped in a dermatologist's body. And I think that is true. I'm here today because I think that what happens in the doctor-patient room is not well understood outside of your own individual experience. And sometimes I feel incredibly frustrated that I'm not able to communicate like my true passion with the world based on what's happening in those rooms.
Good morning. I'm Nancy Fuller. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I spent first 23 years of my life here. Moved to the East Coast for about 10, just enough time to grab a husband, bring him back to Ohio with me. So I'm a mother of 3 adult sons, and I had a career managing sales teams for about 24 years. But my real passion is health, and it hits home hard with me because 2 of my 3 adult sons have pretty severe mental health conditions, of which we haven't really uncovered the answers that we've hoped for from the medical community, from public health. So my life is just always searching to help my current sons in their conditions of anxiety, depression, OCD, epilepsy, autism, all within 2 people. And so it's been a hard journey. I do the best I can based on what I know. I've taken advice from some mainstream doctors, but that hasn't always left me satisfied with all I can do. And so it's kind of sent me on a journey looking into alternative ways to address things, more natural ways to address things.
Good morning. I am Dr. Keisha Callens, and I'm super excited to be here. This year marks exactly 20 years since I finished medical school. Woohoo! So my focus primarily has been public health and also women's health. Today, I'm coming to you from Jeffersonville, Georgia, which is the geographic center of our state in Georgia, and have been privileged to always have worked in rural communities since I graduated. And I'm not sure how I got to rural. I guess rural kind of selected me, but I've also always wanted to be in areas where people need access to care. And pretty much the reason that I'm excited about being here today is really to talk about access. I think a lot of times when we think about healthcare, we think about, what's available in our urban communities and our well-resourced communities. But I can tell you that about half my patients are uninsured. Not because they're necessarily impoverished, but because they just are not able to afford coverage. I'm thrilled to be here today. And really, I'll just have one more quote that I learned from a presentation that I went to. As a physician, you can either decide to be honored or bothered. When people reach out for your help, what's your response going to be? And I think it's very important for us to always remember that it's an honor to be with people on their best days and then also on their worst days.
I'm Daniel DeLuca from Athens, Ohio. That's a pretty rural area. So we were just talking about rural areas. Southeastern Ohio has been a pretty rural area for a very long time. So I own two college bars because there's a university right in our town. And so that's my main thing. I also have rental houses. And then I got involved in independent politics, during the COVID years is what kind of pulled me more into that. We're also heavily involved with the MAHA, Ohio. So we've been doing a lot of events, setting up all those kind of things, helping with policy, trying to get a lot of, healthier things pushed and all that kind of stuff. As far as, I know a lot of MAHA people are looked at as like they don't trust anyone in the medical field and there's all this kind of hate. Me, I never really had that problem. I still don't. I have that issue. I do like to have truth, though. I like to find answers to things. So when something shows up that I'm questioning, I'm going to do the research. And if I find out like, hey, this doesn't make any sense, I'm going to keep talking to people until I can get that answer. And the biggest time that I had those questions were during, COVID and the virus itself, then the vaccines themselves, lots of questions. So I just wanted to find answers to a lot of different things. So that was kind of what brought me in, I guess.
Good morning. I'm Ross England. I'm an infectious diseases pediatrician practicing in Philadelphia, Children's Hospital, Philadelphia. I think I'm here because I think the infectious diseases field, has really been in the limelight in the past couple of years, where I don't think most people knew we existed as a specialty probably before that. I think I was interested in giving the perspective of an infectious diseases specialist. I'm someone who I got into infectious diseases. You'll find a lot of people in infectious diseases that got into it because they read The Hot Zone by Richard Preston. And then I just kind of really got interested in germs. But then I kind of entered the field and have really loved the field because of the patients. It's a field where you really need to spend time with patients' stories in order to make effective diagnoses. And a lot of times, if you don't spend that time, you'll miss it. And that's one of the things I really love about it.
So I'm Leonard Curry, and I'm the host of the Autism Parenting Secrets podcast, and I'm a strategic parenting advisor. Originally, I'm from Brooklyn. Spent most of my career working as a CPA and then a CFO and a controller working for the behemoth banks in New York. And when I ended my career there, when my son was diagnosed with autism in 2008, I was working as a Six Sigma Master Black Belt, basically somebody who was really good at re-engineering dysfunctional processes and overall like helping organizations to operate more effectively. So that's what I was doing when my son was diagnosed with moderate borderline severe autism. With him and my wife and I combining to help him, I really became focused on how parents make decisions, how they navigate a diagnosis like autism. So really, ever since my son was diagnosed, I've been obsessed with figuring out how can parents get better equipped to make great decisions for their child, which at least when we entered and started getting advice from practitioners, there was very little guidance we were getting on underlying root causes. We were actually being told there really wasn't much hope, kind of basically, see if you can help manage behaviors. Maybe my wife and I should go get therapy ourselves. There's things we can do in that way, but we weren't really given much hope about what potentially we could do to help him. And so that's basically been, what I've been focused on ever since.
Morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Dr. Jamie Lair. I'm a family physician in Ithaca, New York. I grew up here. I've got a wife and 4 adult children, And probably the biggest thing about me is that I've owned my own private practice for 25 years and I've been a doctor for 35 years. And so that makes me a little bit of an outlier because there aren't many private practitioners anymore. I'm also an advocate for primary care. Primary care is the first person you're going to see. It's the person who's going to help you get the care you need. And I can either take care of you about 80% of the time, but then also refer you to the people who know more than I do. And that requires me to be humble because there's lots of things that I don't know. And I need someone to say, okay, there's a better person who can answer your questions. I also live in Ithaca, New York, and the favorite phrase there is that it's 10 square miles surrounded by reality. Like many college towns, it's a very large, unvaccinated, vaccine hesitant population. And so when I started out, I just had to keep on talking about why I believed in vaccines and listen to people who didn't. They get to decide what they want to do. They just have to politely listen to me once a year when I come in for a checkup, and I'm going to offer the vaccines and tell them why I believe in them. And I have lots of people who don't choose to vaccinate, and we move on after they've listened to me why I recommend them. I kept on in the vaccine field. I worked with the CDC. I was on the ACIP, and until June, I was supposed to be the chair of the ACIP starting July 1st. So I have a very strong belief in vaccines. I believe in the CDC. I don't always agree with them, and I can come to different conclusions, but I trust them. I feel like they have the best interest of the whole public at heart.
Hey everyone, I'm really excited to just hear from you all and meet you all. My name is Craig. I am an emergency physician. I have been doing emergency medicine for 18 years, almost completely in New York City, but the last couple of years I've been in Providence, Rhode Island. I also am a public health professor. I teach at Brown University School of Public Health and have taught public health for the past 10 years. Most of the 2010s, I was spending about 6 months of the year in places like Burundi during civil conflict, providing trauma care. Ross, unlike you, I didn't get inspired in infectious diseases by reading The Hot Zone, but by getting Ebola itself and taking care of patients with Ebola in Guinea, which was also an experience that I think, I use the term radicalized, but I really think that's true. Really opened my eyes to a lot of the inequities in care, not just internationally in terms of what people can receive in terms of treatments and vaccines and quality medical care, but what that looks like here in our own country. Being on the front line, you see how fundamentally broken in so many ways the healthcare system is in the US and who it benefits. And I've progressively kind of moved a lot of my time, if not some of my passion, from the international sphere to thinking about how we improve so much of our health and healthcare and public health discussion domestically.
Okay, so the first question, one of the things that we found was that only 12% of physicians in this particular survey said that they'd recommend their profession to the younger generation. Only 12%. Dr. Jamie, what do you think is behind that, like only 12%?
It's a hard job. It is a lot of work. If you're full-time is not 40 hours a week. It's usually 50 to 55 hours a week. The amount of training you need is at least 7 years on top of college. So you've got college and then 4 years of medical school and then 3 years of residency. And that's 3 years of residency for your simplest residency, primary care. If you're going to be a cardiovascular surgeon, it's 7 years of residency. And so there's a lot of effort and time in it. And even when you get to the point where you're an attending physician, it's a lot of work and a lot of stress because you're dealing with people's lives. And if you make a mistake, it can be devastating for them. And that can be true delivering babies, that can be true during surgery, that could be true missing a diagnosis. And you care about people, and so you don't want to miss things. You don't want to make mistakes. Most of the people who go into it are very caring, but also type A personalities who want to get things right. And so it's very hard to understand that a lot of medicine is uncertain and there's a lot of wiggle room, and you're just not always sure about the best thing to do. And so when people ask me if they want to go into medicine, I'd sort of say, why? and make sure they understand what they're getting into. I'm still happy that people are going into medicine, but I don't want them to misunderstand what they're going into.
Dr. Keisha, does that resonate with you?
So I have a lot of thoughts on that. And honestly, I think that the question needs to be qualified because we need to know the why. So liability is a big deal, in terms of legal implications. And that is a huge consideration. I'm in Georgia, and for 2 or 3 years in a row, we have been the top of the list in terms of litigation. And so really that's a big fear. Like people are concerned about their personal assets. So there's some really interesting and real value to what you're committing to when you decide to become a physician, depending on the specialty you choose as well, how much you may make versus the time that you're putting into it. I mean, if you're a radiologist, you may be doing just fine. If you're an oncologist, an OBGYN, but if you're a pediatrician, then things may be very different depending on the kind of lifestyle that you want. Cost. I'm a first generation everything. And so I got loans for college, grad school, med school. And so being able to pay your loans back is a really big consideration in terms of the investment. And with all the things that are changing right now and your ability to be able to get assistance for that, that's a really big consideration. So it's not just people may not want to care in that way, but what is it going to cost them long term? And then, of course, there's family, right? You want to have pets, you want to have plants, you want to have children, maybe. So what does that look like for you? And I can tell you many times I was told, if you want to have a family, don't be an OBGYN. And I was like, I can do whatever I want. And I did. But not everybody has that kind of support to be able to tackle that. And so depending on kind of what your influences are. And then the last thing I'll mention is burnout. That's a real thing. And so I have a attending that said, one day we'll get to spending as much time with our patient as we do with our computer, right? We're always competing. And if you go into the room with a patient and you want to be eye to eye and spend time with them, depending on your EHR and your ability to have scribing, recording, you may not be able to give as much time, or you have demands on seeing 40 patients a day. And so there are all these things that really kind of are competing interests, and you may not know that till you get into it. And so the people who are in it might just be saying, don't do it, don't do it. However, I want to just push back on all of that because we've all lived through all of that. Patients need help. And we have an opportunity to learn and keep learning and practice medicine in a way that can help everybody feel better. And so I would not do differently. I thought I was going to be a pediatrician, and then I saw the light and I became an OBGYN. And honestly, every day I am reminded of why that's so important, whether or not it's bringing a baby into the world or it's just helping someone with their vaginal itching. I mean, those things are life-changing. How do I improve quality of life? And so I feel like I can best serve in that capacity. And so I think there are a lot of things to weigh, but I don't think that that 12%, there's probably a lot more to that story. And we would probably need to figure that out. And hopefully that helps.
Dr. Craig, you had a thought.
Yeah, it's so wonderful hearing everyone's thoughts on this. Look, I have this conversation all the time. I'm at a public health school. A big chunk of our students, use their MPH training as a resume builder to go to medical school. And I try to convince a lot of them to stay in public health or do more of public health. So I have this conversation a lot. And anyone that has read what I write or listened to me at all knows that I have massive amounts of frustrations with the medical system. But let me tell you, people ask me all the time, Craig, how is it that you can do public health, sit in academia where I don't always feel comfortable, and spend time in an office, thinking philosophically about public health in the past? And I will say that the time that I spend every single week, 8 to 12 hours in the emergency room, like Jamie and Ross and others have, already pointed out, that time when you're able to just separate from everything else that's happening. And I try to do this in an emergency room as much as possible. There is no more impactful or greater source of joy for me. There is nothing that is more grounding than being frequently reminded, patient after patient in an emergency department, the realities of what people are going through, people just like your family, your friends, your community members. I cannot imagine a space or a place where I don't do that. And I know that as soon as I do, it unhinges me from the reality of what is happening in the system. So all of those things are true. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of frustration. I am in emergency medicine, the number one field for burnout. I can't tell you how many of my friends have left this field. There are not 50 or 60-year-old emergency medicine doctors. We just don't make it. And despite all that, I can think of nothing cooler and more rewarding to be able to do, and so incredibly grateful that I have this opportunity, but also for how much it feeds back to me to keep me grounded and keep me real.
Danny, I just want to double back to something you said because I'm curious if we start to digest our truth serum and we really start to talk about the frustrations and the difficulties for doctors. You said that when you see something that doesn't add up to you, you like to go out and search and find the answers and question it. I imagine every doctor applauds that. They want to engage patients. But I would love to just ask the doctors on this call, because I think this gets to some of the heart of the MAHA movement as it enters the exam room. You, I imagine, have more and more patients who are coming to you who don't have a medical background, don't have a scientific background. They have their instincts, they have their eyes, they have relationships, they've trusted people in their lives who are going through things. They're drawing conclusions, they're forming questions in their minds. There's a movement that's saying that's a good thing. We encourage that. Do you think, if you're being honest, that that is actually a really good thing? That patients without medical experience, backgrounds in science, are questioning and coming to different conclusions than what you have come to through your years of experience in dealing with this? Like, can we just have like a really honest conversation about that? Like, what's the tipping point for maybe where that's not a great thing? Or is it all good and this is what we want and we got to bust up the 15 minutes with your patient and we got to engage more with them? Like, does anyone want to just take that on?
Dr. J.B. Lair.
Thank you. So I'm in primary care, and in primary care, I know that I don't know a lot of things. And so I have to be humble. And when patients come in, they sometimes have information that I don't have. And so I need to listen to that information. And sometimes I can say, no, that's really not right. Or sometimes I can say, I didn't think about that, and I need to look at it some more, and I'll look it up for you. Or if I've got time in the room, I can do it right there. So my job is to referee their information and to give them my training and my background on what they're coming up with and tell them why I think it's reasonable or not reasonable, or tell them I don't know. And that happens a lot. They want to know if this is a good idea or not. And I say, I don't know anything that says it's a bad idea. As long as it doesn't cost too much money, go right ahead. I don't mind people coming in with specific questions from family or friends or Dr. Google, as long as they come to me and they're sort of asking me to vet them. That's how I approach it.
Dr. Jamie, how do you, in like a specific case, you were talking about vaccines and that you see a community that can be vaccine hesitant. What do you do in an instance where someone does come to you with a question or is really not sure that they want to take a particular childhood vaccine for their kid? And they're pretty certain that they don't want to do it, right? Just take us through your conversation in that moment.
So the first question is always, what are you thinking? Where are you coming from? What's your understanding of the information? And they might not trust the pharmaceutical company. They might not trust the CDC. They might not trust the vaccine. They don't think the vaccine is necessary. One of the most revealing questions I'll often ask is, if you were going to India and there was polio there, would you accept the polio vaccine? And almost everyone, I've only had 2 people in 35 years who said no. So almost everyone is willing to accept a vaccine when they feel that the risk is high enough. And so what they're doing is they are making a calculated risk-benefit analysis, and they don't think that the vaccine is necessary in the United States in their lifestyle at this time. And we all do that. We do that when we go on a plane versus a car versus a train. There's all these safety things. And so I might disagree with their risk analysis and I tell them why, but it's their choice. And I'm going to support their choice by telling them why I think that I disagree with them. And then we move on to something else. There's only been one time in my career where I've overruled a family. And I'll just tell you about this because it's actually important. But there is a child who had cancer that was 95% treatable, and the family didn't want treatment. And I got them involved with the oncologist. The oncologist saw them, and the family still didn't want treatment. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't allow that. And I got the court system involved. And the court system said, you can have care of your child, but you have to treat your child because this cancer is treatable. And so I'm not going to say I'm never going to do that because I've done it once. But parents and people have the right to make their own decisions. And they're coming to me for my opinions. I'm going to give them my opinions, and then they're going to move forward as long as it's not incredibly dangerous and threatening. Thank you.
Dr. Jamie, thank you for that. Len, I wonder, I know you had a thought on that, but also what is your reaction to that example that Dr. Jamie just gave, which is that he mostly wants to work with patients, but that there's that one time where he was like, no, not on my watch. I'm going to get the courts involved.
Yeah, hard for me to weigh in on that one example without, more of the facts. I mean, I'm a huge fan of parental sovereignty to make the right decisions for their family, no matter what. I do think, though, it comes down, and I loved Dr. Jamie talking about humility as a practitioner. I think that's rare, maybe gaining some momentum, but otherwise there's lots of practitioners who don't have humility and that kind of openness. But it really does come down to good decision making. So parents on any decision should weigh the costs and the benefits. And sometimes that's hard. Some people are better at doing that than others. And sometimes it's easy to focus more on short-term costs and benefits and not think about the long-term. So I do think it comes down to parents making informed choices. While I respect the decision-making of a parent, and sometimes you hear parents who say, I just don't want to do X, Y, and Z. It's reflexive. I respect parents trusting their intuition, but I believe in something called informed intuition. So just blindly trusting your gut. I feel like parents can do a better job of getting more aware of what's going on, understanding the real costs, benefit, risks, all that, to make an informed choice of what's right for them. And I think if parents have that ability, they will make great choices. Now, are there exceptions where sometimes parents aren't seeing things clearly? Then yes, it's the job of practitioners to help them see what maybe they can't see. But again, I think as a rule, I respect the decision-making autonomy of a parent to decide what's right for their family based on their values. And I recognize Dr. Jamie's highlighting maybe a more extreme exception to that rule, but I'm a huge fan of the rule.
Dr. Morg, you playing the role of doctor, not host for a moment. What do you make of this line of conversation where patients come into the room with you and not just have questions, but are making assertions? They've found new sources of information.
Yeah.
How does that change your experience? Do you feel like expertise is sliding out the window? Do you feel like this is stressful? Do you feel like this is burning you out when all you're trying to do is help people? Like, just talk about what this is like emotionally and psychologically for you as a doctor.
Yeah. First of all, I think a key part of a healthy physician-patient relationship is brutal honesty. I can't tell you how many times I come into the room like a lightning rod with some patients where I'm just like, I don't believe what you're telling me, or why are you acting this way? Or you don't sound, I say, how are you doing? And they're like, fine. And I'm like, that didn't sound convincing. What's really going on? I think you've got to you don't have a lot of time in the room, and you have to break these barriers fast, and you have to let them know that there is going to be some authenticity here. We're going to, nobody's listening. It's fine. Just be yourself. Let your guard down. I think I do that a lot with patients. I've even had situations where I feel like the interaction is not going well. And I'll say, you know what? I'm going to take a time out. I'm going to leave the room, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to start this again. And it really just changes the narrative very quickly. You have a combative patient. You have somebody who's not listening, who's not listening to you. You feel they're not listening to you. You're not listening to them. It's just a bad situation. So we just start over. You know what? Let's try this again. I think the first thing that happens with all of us here in this room is that, patients are coming to us. They sought our opinion. They scheduled an appointment. They went to the ER. They chose to come for the most part. Obviously, you can be taken to the ER against your will, but for the most part, they've chosen to come to you. So, in a way, we're kind of in this circle where everything is kind of hunky dory. But there are people who are not even entering the system, and I think those are the people that really just have a large amount of distrust and ill feelings towards the medical community. I think that what works is when a doctor is able to take care of all comers. I think that it's always a case by case. Like, so I'm going to tell a story. Jamie just told a story. I'm going to tell a story about what happened to me just yesterday. I had a very young patient come in with a very serious diagnosis. They had reams of paper. They had family members with reams of paper. They read everything. My advice was literally stop reading. Stop. You are paralyzing yourself into being able to make a decision. And I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I'm telling you, you need to stop reading the internet. You need to stop searching on Google. You need to stop asking ChatGPT. And I'm not saying that because I think what I'm going to tell you is better than all of that. I'm telling you that because I don't think you're doing yourself any service. You're hurting yourself. And, those are the types of, and, the patient became tearful. And you know what they said? They said, you know what, doc, you're right. You're right. I got to stop this. It was like anxiety was like taking over them because they felt like the burden had to be on them to solve this devastating diagnosis. I mean, how are they going to solve? I ask a lot of patients, I say, what do you do for a living? It comes across accusatory, but I say, what do you do for a living? One of my opening lines is, do you work in science and medicine? And then depending on or do you work in, what it is it? And then depending on their answer, I really tailor my conversation to try to like match what I think they need to hear. And I know this sounds like a little bit like, oh, this guy he thinks he knows everything. He thinks he's going to tell these people what they need to hear. I do know a lot. I do know a lot about the situation. And you came to ask me for my opinion, and I'm going to give it to you. I'm okay if you, decide not to like follow it, but I'm going to have a really authentic conversation, one that's a lot better than ChatGPT is going to give you.
Nancy Fuller, I want you to react to what Mark just said, and I know that you had a story you wanted to share from your own life.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about what Mark said was 30 years ago when my son was diagnosed with autism, I had nothing to read. Google was hardly even available. So I kind of had to rely on what the doctors were saying. And my son's diagnosis, I was just shocked. And what they were saying was really negative. They were telling me all the things my son would never do, and they really didn't know that. He probably will never talk. He has an intellectual severe disability. And I said, well, if he can't talk, how do you know he's that disabled? I'm challenging them right in the diagnosis of a team of doctors from Children's Hospital around me. So I didn't have a resource to go to other than maybe the library, and I didn't. So it was very frustrating to hear that. And I just wanted to share based on what Dr. Jamie said. At my pediatrician, my second son was diagnosed with autism within weeks after my third son was born. So as I take my third son into my pediatrician, I said, I have a diagnosis here on my second son, and I don't know whether vaccines could even play a role here. But if they do, and there's a genetic component, I don't want to harm my baby. And this guy just strong-armed me. You don't know what you're talking about. That baby needs its vaccines today. And I felt vulnerable. I felt taken advantage of. And he gave him the vaccine. So I regretted that. I regretted it. And it's a hard memory. But I did go in after that to the head of that doctor's office. And I said, we're going to have to leave here unless you agree to walk with me differently with my third son. Because there's too much you don't know about really what happened. And there's unanswered questions I have. So I have to walk slowly and carefully with this third child. So she agreed to that, and we did walk slowly. And my third son was fully vaccinated, but it was on my terms and her terms. And it felt safer at that point.
Thank you, Nancy, for sharing that story. Len, why don't we go to you next?
Yeah, just a short comment because I so appreciate Nancy sharing that. And my story is very similar. And my only comment is there are so many parents who have experienced that. And that was your experience, Nancy, a long time ago. Mine was almost 20 years ago. And from parents that I'm advising and working with and helping them it's still the same refrain they're getting from many practitioners, where they don't really, they just dismiss the parents' concerns, which, in my mind are very legitimate. Nancy was only doing what her role required, which is for her to think critically about what made sense. And I just feel like so many times practitioners, not that they're ill-intentioned, but the system doesn't incent them to look at things with curiosity, with openness. And so I just wanted to make the comment that you would think 20 years later, things would have shifted in a more positive direction. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. I hear a phrase a lot of times. It's like, when you know more, you do better. And Nancy, you're talking about, you said 20 or 30 years ago. Len, you also said something in that range of 20 to 30 years ago. Do you think that you going to the pediatrician today would be a different experience with your third child? How do you think that experience would be now in the environment that we're in, Nancy?
Would hope and pray it would have been a lot better today. I don't know that for sure. I do know that I could have easily gone in with a more informed questions because of the way of the internet. I mean, we were talking about Dr. Google, Dr. Chat. I think so easily, right, wrong, or indifferent, I could have composed questions and hesitancy that I think would have been more respected. But when I went in 30 years ago, I was very ignorant to what even to ask other than I'm scared. So I would hope, Mark, that it would be a lot better today, and in part because I could go in with a more informed concern and questions.
Dr. Jamie, I wonder if I might come to you because I think this is, I think Nancy's story is probably one that you've either experienced or heard yourself. What goes through your mind when you hear that story?
I'm disappointed in my profession because that's not the role that we're supposed to be doing. People get to make their own decisions. There are times when their decisions affect other people, and that does become a concern. But if in general, people get to make their own decisions, and it's not my right to force them or shame them into making certain decisions. So I'm disappointed in my profession.
Dr. Jamie, I just want to follow up with one quick question. Like, you were on ASIP, you got ousted by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in this HHS. I'm sure you have feelings about that. One of the things that Kennedy is doing, though, is shining a big spotlight on this idea of informed consent. Just the news this week of, moving several of our standard vaccines over to a shared clinical decision-making category, speaks to that.
Which is what it always was, by the way. But
right,
go ahead,
it's always a recommendation, but people can argue, and as Nancy's story points out, in the reality of the doctor's office, it's not always been for everybody informed consent. It's more of like, this is the system, get with it. But Dr. Jamie, do you think Kennedy is onto the right thing by shining a light and trying to promote informed consent?
So personally, I don't, because that's the way I've always practiced. And so he's not changing anything that I do differently in my office. I understand, at least I think I understand the concerns of many people where they feel that they don't have informed consent, that they feel that they are strong-armed or forced into certain circumstances. I consider the CDC and the ACIP, their role is to make recommendations for the country for public health and to say that on average for this 2-year-old or this 73-year-old, this is the best choice that we think that you should take given these circumstances. And then people can take that advice and decide what they want to do with it. And so I don't see that informed consent was ever missing. We were making recommendations for the country. So I don't see that this is a big deal. I understand that people do. As for the specific things that Secretary Kennedy are doing, I also believe in the process. I'm a family doctor, and I know there's lots of things I don't know. And I have found over my career that having more minds involved is better than just having one person making a decision. And so I believe in the process, and that's what the ACIP did. They gathered information and they looked at all the information and they organized it and they said, based on all this information, this is what we think is best for the country. And what I see Secretary Kennedy doing is saying he, in my opinion, doesn't trust vaccines as much as I do. He feels that they're not as well studied, as safe as we think they are. And so he wants to, I think, discourage vaccines. That would be my suggestion. And that's one person's opinion. And the analogy that I come up with is if the Secretary of Transportation came and said, you know, I'm not really sure we need seatbelts or airbags. They're helpful. We find that sometimes they help, but lots of times you don't need them and you can drive around without them. And so we don't really think that you should do that. And I just would disagree with that because that's one person's opinion. And I want to see lots of other people weighing in and saying, maybe we don't need seatbelts and airbags, and having the argument as opposed to just one person coming up with it. So
thank you, Dr. Jamie. I mean, look, let's be honest. There are some of your Kennedy supporters on this call. Danny, what do you think about what Dr. Jamie just said and Tom's question?
I definitely see where there's a divide on why do we even need to promote something it's already been something that's been in the medical field. You have the freedom of choice, right? But then you've also had this COVID time where there wasn't for a lot of people. Well, now people are like, do I even need to trust my doctor? Are they just being paid to tell me what to do? Do they even care about me, or are they just protecting their own job? Like, those are a lot of issues that came up. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think those are where a lot of this divide came from.
I want to go back to something that Dr. Jamie talked about, and just this kind of concept of informed consent, because I'll tell you, in my mind, when I first heard that statement, I was like, isn't everything informed consent? Like, we're living in a democracy. It's like a free society when you go in. As I began to talk with more, particularly MAHA supporters, as well as other people with their medical experiences, and then kind of reflecting back on my own, right? Especially in Dr. Tisha, when I was giving birth, I have no memory of like my baby being taken away to get the Hep B birth dose, for instance. No memory of a conversation, no memory of that happening. Now, I'm told that doctors have that conversation. It's informed consent, and there's this big conversation that happens. But I'll be honest with you, it's lucky I kind of just trust those things because I have no memory of those conversations actually happening. So I wonder if we can sit for a second with this concept of informed consent and how does it actually play out day to day? Like, do you as doctors, just be honest, do you think you are engaging in informed consent, or is there a part of you that's like, look, this is kind of the public health way. AAP has said it. All these people do it. The assumption is you're going to get it. There are pediatricians I know who don't let in the unvaccinated into their offices, and there may be a good reason for that. But I just want to understand how you view that. Does anyone want to take that? Dr. Keisha, go for it.
So I got a lot of thoughts, and so I think we're going to have a part two because I have lots of things in my head. I don't think anyone will disagree. But this has been great, and I love listening to the perspective. So informed consent really is informed consent, and we have been doing that. I do think that when patients come in now, they may have a lot more information on their own research, which makes that conversation a little bit more detailed. But before I do a procedure for a follow-up on a colposcopy, or before I do a C-section, I do go through those things with my patient and have been taught to do that. So I got to circle back to something Dr. Jamie said earlier about our profession. And this is the reason I'm not leaving medicine and we need more people, because we teach our students the science of medicine, but we don't teach the practice part of medicine as much. And so we can do a better job of the physicians that are coming on board of how to really engage in patients. And I listened to Nancy, and I don't usually allow people to cry unless it's Friday, but Nancy, you have an exception, and I wanted to cry too because I don't like that you had that experience. However, it is important for us to realize that we have a responsibility to rebuild trust. The yellow sign behind me says change happens at the speed of trust. And sometimes we're building it, and sometimes we're rebuilding those bridges. And so we have an opportunity, and Nancy, if you decide to have one more child, we can try this again on the fourth one. But we have an opportunity when we hear those things to really make an effort to rebuild that trust. And that's what physicians are supposed to do. And the other last point I'll make is that when it comes to informed decision making, shared decision making, the patient physician partnership, which is what it always should be, and I have to, detox the Google and the TikTok all the time. However, I love that patients are engaging and they're wanting to learn more, but information without instruction is really harmful. And so it is our job to really guide that process. And so it's important for us really to think about the source of the information and helping patients understand, but also the influencers. I have a lot of young patients who are resistant to birth control because someone in their family or their grandma said it was not a good idea because it didn't work for them. So I'll say, call grandma, get her on the phone. Let's have the conversation together. So how do we really, like Dr. Jamie said, figure out where patients are really coming from? And the last point I'll make is a lot of times when patients come in and tell what they want to do, they're focused on the treatment only and the outcome. But my job is to figure out, why does that happen? That is what the physician's responsibility is, the why, so we can prevent it in that patient, prevent it in future people, just really how we work on that. And a lot of times when patients are coming with information, we're not always exploring the why, we're focusing on the what we need to do. And so that is where the profession is responsible for doing a better job of helping our patients through that process. We cannot always change the outcome, but we can help that journey. And Nancy, I hope that the other interactions that you have with your physicians and providers and the care committee, as I call them, the team, is more positive. But if it's not, demand it. And if you're not getting it, you got to go somewhere else till you find it.
I have something. I want to say something about informed consent. I think that we have to realize that informed consent doesn't look the same for everybody. Informed consent for Brenda is very different than informed consent for Daniel, than different than for Nancy. And we get to that point by asking the patients questions. How much do you want to know, Nancy? How much do you want to know, Brenda? Do you want me to go through everything in detail? Are you squeamish? I ask a lot of questions to kind of gauge what version of informed consent I'm going to give. And that is informed consent because it meets you where you are. Some people are overwhelmed by more information, and I'll skip over the things that don't really matter. And I'm not going to give, if you are mad about a 15-minute appointment, you better shut the up about informed consent. You cannot do it with the way that we are being told that that this informed consent is some sort of amazing North Star, that we've gone over every single side effect and every single possibility in a 15-minute appointment. It doesn't work that way. And it shouldn't work that way. There is such thing as too much information. And that's just the reality of not medicine. It's the reality of humanity. I think if I gave you informed consent in the way that people are demanding it, you wouldn't like it.
Nancy, what do you think about that?
Just want to say that I don't feel clearly I had informed consent on the story I'd previously told. I felt manipulated. No good questions were asked of me, Mark. And to Keisha's point, we're going to push what the system wants. We're not going to ask why. And to me, I had a lot of whys. And sadly, I still have a lot of whys that have never been able to be answered about the health of my children. So the focus was on get it done and at all costs. And it was not on serving me where I was at that point. But I will say, the pediatrician we do have now in our family understands my concerns, understands our past, and respects it when he's talking to myself and my son. And I really, really value that. It's helped open my heart to trusting physicians again, which quite frankly, with those earlier experiences, people wonder why you don't trust doctors, why you don't trust people. When you have those kind of really invalidating experiences, it sends you the other way.
And what is it about this pediatrician that you trust?
He listens more than necessarily talks. And to Mark's point, he asks questions. What are you concerned about? Where are things at right now? How can I help you? Versus just checking the box to move on, where some doctor's appointments, you could tell there's a timed issue going on and they got to get out the door. And I really feel sorry for physicians that are under that level of duress, because I don't know how you really serve your patients well when the clock is ticking.
You can, and there are a lot of people that do it well. Just we should know that that's a real possibility.
Len, you had a thought.
Yeah, just a quick comment on my own personal experience and then an overall comment on informed consent. So, like Nancy, so going back, when my son was born, first day of life, I didn't feel like I really had informed consent. My wife and I, we didn't really have informed consent. We were presented with a form saying we needed to sign it. We didn't have time to read it. They were taking my son away for the Hep B vaccine. So while it may have technically been informed consent that we did sign a form, it felt coerced. And that's where informed consent can't exist in that type of environment. So I think the way it's done is really key. And now just fast forwarding to right now with this is a great discussion on informed consent. I don't think true informed consent is possible if the underlying science doesn't meet the gold standard of rigor. And that's all RFK Jr. is about. So I don't believe that he's anti anything. I don't think he has an agenda he's implementing. He just wants the studies that underlie a lot of these decisions for those to be something that are reliable and that can enable a parent, in this case, to have genuine informed consent based on rigor and science and for them to make the cost benefit decision. So I don't think you can have informed consent if that rigorous science is not done. And I believe that's what RFK Jr. is all about.
Len, I'm just going to comment real quick because you talked about what he's doing. This idea that the CDC made this change, I think we should be really careful about our wording. The CDC didn't make this change. CDC scientists did not make this change based on science. This was Secretary Kennedy and political appointees making this change. And so I think you should really be reflective about if you're asking for the policies that we're being told are the policies, which is this new change that it should be based in science. You should recognize that it is not based in science. And we're going to have a whole episode on that in a little bit. But just because I think in this kind of conversation, it's really important to not take away from like your own personal experience, but to be precise about the situation that we're in. And I think it is a really important point for people who are listening to understand that we now are in a situation where we are very clearly being told to do things that are not being based on what we call gold standard science.
I'll say one thing, which is that what President Trump and Secretary Kennedy referred to was that they have apparently been speaking with scientists and doctors from these peer countries, and that's what they based the recommendation on. But I think Mark is right that it didn't come from ACIP. But Len, do you want to just weigh in on what Mark said?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with what he's saying in the sense that if decisions are made and they're not based on science, then that, I have an issue with that as well. I'm talking more conceptually that the bedrock of informed consent is really good science that is behind what's being recommended. And I believe that hasn't really been done for a lot of reasons. I don't believe that some of these government agencies are truly independent and playing the role that they're meant to play. I do believe there's been a lot of extreme influence from other parties and other interests. So it's that spirit of what he's trying to do. I'm not talking about this specific decision, and I'm sure this administration can make decisions that maybe don't have a lot of science behind it, and that I'm not saying that that's okay either. I'm just talking about where we want to get to is a place where parents are actually in a position where they can make informed decisions based on objective science. And I feel like in many cases, in many instances, that's not available for parents even now.
Thank you, Len. Dr. Craig Spencer, you had a thought.
Yeah, thanks, Len, for sharing that. And Nancy, I just wanted to thank you again for sharing your story because it reminds me of a few things. One is that for so many folks that I think this show has spoken to over the past year and that I talk to in kind of my own clinical practice is how powerful the persistence of bad experiences can be. And often for a lot of the folks I talk to, how frequent they can be. I think, Jamie, you sound fantastic. Dr. Callens, like you sound like wonderful providers. But the reality is that for a lot of folks, and even for myself as a physician that's gone to see other physicians, like not everybody is as forthcoming with their time or their willingness to be open to suggestions. And so I do think we need to recognize that, because the majority of the American public who is frustrated with the American healthcare system recognizes that every time they still go to providers today. But I also want to take this as an opportunity to say that despite how we feel about different things on the science or the vaccination schedule, whatever, we all clearly have a shared incentive to improve this system, because we started this conversation talking about burnout. We were talking about all of 12%, that would say that they want their, folks to go into medicine. There's a reason why we want to spend more than 15 minutes. Maybe I don't want to spend 15 minutes reading the package insert for every single vaccine, but like we want to spend more time to do that. Patients want more time for us to be able to do that. As providers, we need to shoot for a system and help support a system that allows us to do that. And as patients, we need to clamor for that same system. But I think about, Danny, to what you were saying earlier, look at what's happened in the healthcare space. There are very few Dr. Jamies out there right now. One of my colleagues here at Brown does work on private equity. And what has happened in the past couple of years with private equity just gobbling up ophthalmology or GI services all over the country, with a very clear resultant decrease in the quality of care. That is now going into other things that Len and Nancy and others are really important to you. One of my colleagues yesterday published a study looking at private equity in the autism space, and they're doing the exact same thing there. And so this is a place where we all have shared passions and shared incentives, and where we can and should work together. As patients, you want more time with your providers for informed consent and for conversations. As providers, we want to all be able to do what Dr. Mark does, which is have honest conversations with our patients, but it takes more than just a few minutes. And so that is something that I think we all need to think about how we work towards, because outside of us, the space with private equity and hospital mergers and medicine as a business, insurance companies making billions and billions of dollars, there are reasons for us to all be circumspect and concerned about the influence in medicine. And as long as that continues, despite how many Dr. Callens there are and Dr. Marks and Dr. Jamies and Dr. Englands that clearly have their head in the right place, people are going to have a lot of concerns and questions, because what they see is an industry that is built on making profit, not necessarily for the Dr. Jamies, but for other folks that are not necessarily going to be in those exam rooms having those conversations.
Yeah, and Craig, just to tack on, we're also at a moment where, millions of Americans are likely going to lose their 15 minutes with the doctor, as limited as that was, with cuts to, investments in Medicaid, with, the lack of subsidies to afford, healthcare on the open markets. I mean, we're kind of moving where 15 might have seemed like a great amount of time to have with a doctor when you're suddenly not seeing a doctor, or at best very irregularly seeing a doctor because of lack of affordability.
I want to get to our final question. Do you, as doctors, feel set up to succeed right now? And what do you think you need in order to make that a really true statement? And then on the patient side, what is it that you would like from the medical system? And I say system because, to Craig's point and Tom's point, we are living in a country of systems, not just individual doctors. And what is it that you are looking for from the system? So let me first go to some of the doctors on, do you feel like you're set up to succeed right now? I want to start with Dr. Keisha Callens.
I don't know that I can answer that question, honestly, because there are so many challenges. And I already work in a space where, as I mentioned before, a lot of my patients are uninsured, and there's going to be an even larger probably number of people who are needing care that used to have coverage. And so what I am going to tell you is that I'm not planning on changing my profession. I'm not planning on retiring. I'm not moving out of Georgia. And I am going to do everything I can to inspire my students, my medical students, my residents to choose to practice in rural communities like I do and have done. So I will tell you that. In our federally qualified health center system, which we talked about systems, many of you are probably familiar. We are federally funded, so there's that caveat. However, we are able to offer financial assistance to patients so they can get primary care at an affordable amount. And that has always been the backbone of care for a lot of patients in rural and underserved communities. And so I'm happy that we are still able to do that. And I get a chance to travel and work in multiple areas. And I have the flexibility to offer women's health care in a lot of places where patients will not have access. I have patients that walk to my office right now. It's 2026. Transportation is not guaranteed. And so when I think about success, every day that the Lord wakes me up, that means I have an opportunity to still be here. I have an amazing team. My nurse, Miss LaFay, is fantastic. It's not just on me. Our front desk, when they answer the phone and they make an appointment for a patient, if they feel like it's a crisis and I need to maybe see them sooner, they'll send me a message and say, hey, this patient called and this is what's going on. I say, okay, well, I can make room. I can come in early at 7:30 and see that patient if they need to go to work. And so maybe I do have what I need to be successful because it's not just me. It's the team that's surrounding. It's the system that we have that allows that support. And I have a leadership and administrative team that gives me flexibility to change sites if I need to, or sometimes I feel like I'm a mobile doctor because I can go to another place and I can set up and meet a patient or do a procedure if I need to do that because they don't have transportation. I mean, I have people who drive 2 hours to see me. So maybe I do have the things that I need. And instead of me thinking about all the challenges that exist, is just relying on the people that also have that familiar or similar commitment. And just realizing that I love the quote that I use all the time. We may not be able to change the world, but we can change the world of each person with whom we interact. When it comes to women's health, that's key. Because if I take care of a mom or a grandma and she's good, then her goodness influences everybody in her sphere of influence.
Does any other doctor want to weigh in before I go to some of the other folks? Do you feel like you're set up for success in this moment, or what do you think you need?
Yeah, I would say I agree with so much of what Keisha said, that in my practice environment, I'm incredibly privileged to work with a lot of people who do help set me up to succeed. So on the one hand, I want to be so appreciative of that. And I love the hospital that I work for. And I think with so many patients, I'm able to succeed. But I think hearing some of the concerns from Len and Nancy and Daniel, I share, I think, similar thoughts to what Craig has said about the system, that the system doesn't always allow us to succeed the way the patient might need at that immediate moment. And so, if I'm in clinic and I realize I really could use another 60 minutes with a patient, I can't just cancel the next 3 patients, and there may be barriers to scheduling them for another visit. There may not be reimbursement for the type of visit they want, which might just be, talking and so, and that relates to the informed consent issue, which is, how much time in a clinic visit can you really spend going through kind of really detailed legalese? I know during the COVID pandemic, one of the things that came out of it that I think patients really appreciated was an increased availability of insurance remunerated virtual visits that I think for many insurers that has gone away. I can say there are definitely types of visits I can't do virtually. I need to see and examine the patient, but there are actually a subset that we can easily do virtually. And I think the patients appreciate it and wish they could get that kind of care. So I think that I don't know that the system is failing me, but I don't think the system is succeeding for the patients.
Yeah, Dr. Mark.
I've worked in a variety of settings in my career, 20 years, almost 20 years as a doctor. I worked at a major urban hospital system that collapsed, and it was a safety net hospital in the city of Philadelphia, Hahnemann Hospital. The whole system collapsed, and we had to all leave and find new jobs. I've, believe it or not, had a short stint in private equity. I'm currently in a private practice now. I do think that we can succeed. I think I am succeeding. I think we are all set up to succeed. And I think that in order for us to continue to succeed and to believe that we can succeed, we all need to give ourselves and give everybody else a little bit more grace than we're giving anyone. I think that theme has come up on our podcast a couple of times, and I think it's really important. I think that we all have to abandon this idea of magical thinking. I think we're all frustrated by our situations, and sometimes we can't compartmentalize it. And it ends up being having frustrations that are misguided and misdirected. And we all have to be open to like rebuilding like the trust. I think if we dig our heels in and just say like, it's been so wrong and there's no way out of it, that's not setting ourselves up for success. So I think we have to look at ourselves in order to be successful. And I do think that if you look at these doctors, I know it might seem like they're anomalies here. I know a lot of Craig Spencers. I know a lot of Dr. Jamies. I know a lot of Dr. Keishas. I know they are out there. You just need to find them and find a good match for your style.
Thank you, Dr. Mark. To Mark's point, I'll just weigh in, which is I think you're right that there are, and it's as exemplified here, so many incredible doctors that we have in this country. And they are warriors, they're fighters, they've sacrificed so much to do something that I know people think that there's like huge money in medicine, but really, I think we all just need to realize that where there's money is in finance. If we really want to make money, that's where there's money. I will, however, say that as somebody, just like Mark said, he's had experience as a doctor in different places. I've had experience dealing with insurance from different places, having really great insurance and having terrible insurance and having no insurance at all. And the system doesn't feel set up to help you. So I push back a little bit on the idea that, as patients, we're just constantly like being confronted by great doctors in a great system and there's magical thinking. We have a system that, like, I literally had my doctor just drop me a couple of months ago because they decided that they couldn't take the insurance anymore. And so one of the things I remember telling Craig was, I don't have a primary care doctor right now. So I'm doing my best to like eat healthy and exercise and like drink my lemon herb tea, not because I think I'm like, it's like magical thinking, but because I literally don't have a fucking doctor. Right.
Right.
And like,
I'm talking about you have to be able to get into the system. Right. All of that matters. Absolutely.
That's not the sign of a system that's really working well. That's like,
yeah,
wow.
You've just taken it to another. Absolutely. You've taken it to a whole other level. You've opened up. We haven't even talked about that really, but we need to.
Absolutely. My point is simply that when we talk about systems, we're not just talking about doctors. We're talking about systems working for people. Does anyone, so Len, Danny, Nancy, do you want to weigh in on that? Do you feel set up for success by this system? Len.
Well, I think the system has nothing to do with really helping people to get to the root cause to achieve better health. I think it's really designed to just manage and cope with what people may be experiencing. So I do think the system isn't setting people up for success. But I guess getting to the question you were asking about, what do I want from the medical system? The most important thing is what we've touched on, which is sincere partnership. And that's a term that you can throw out there. It sounds great, but like real partnership in terms of what it looks like is the way I would frame it is it's much more about helping, in this case, parents make better decisions and to adhere to a plan as opposed to complying with what is being prescribed. So compliance as a term doesn't leave room for critical thinking by the parent or curiosity. So I think there's a difference between complying and adherence. And I think the partnership between a parent, let's say, and a practitioner, if it's a true partnership, there's a dialogue. There's advice, there's room for curiosity, room for discussion. And I think where the system breaks down is when it becomes all about compliance. And that immediately erodes trust and can't lead anywhere positive.
Thank you for that, Len. Final word, Nancy Fuller.
I just want to say that, first of all, I really so value the conversation here today. But where my head keeps going to is this divisive system we have right now. I admire the courage of Kennedy to say something's broken here and we got to look at it. I don't admire necessarily every step they've taken to do that. But on the other hand, there's such an extreme position that seems like full compliance on the other side, and there's no mediation between the two. And so in my hope, good health and good public health is going to come hopefully from conversations like we're having here today on what can we do to help bridge the divide between the two.
That's a nice place to end on. I want to thank you all so much. I know this conversation was difficult at times. Our show thinks that these have tremendous value just on us, and just getting to know each other, getting to hear from some different perspectives, and also from our doctors. Like, thank you for what you do, and you're human too. That's the other thing that I think it's really important for us to remember. So a huge thank you to our doctors, to our MAHA supporters, our friends, all of you are friends, for joining us on this conversation. Danny DeLuca, Nancy Fuller, Len Arcuri, Dr. Craig Spencer, Dr. Jamie Laird, Dr. Keisha Callens, Dr. Ross England. A double thank you to Dr. Mark, who's playing many roles today. That was our show. Why Should I Trust You? Please send questions, comments to questions@whyshoulditrustyou.net. I am Brenda Akari. He is Tom Johnson. She is Maggie Bartlett. He is Dr. Mark. We will see you right back here next week.